Welcome back, guys. So, today I have two scary nighttime cold stories for you. Because winter is already cold, I'm here to make your insides cold and send shivers and chills down your spine. Let's begin, and always remember the darkness always follows. One cold night. I've had some paranormal experiences in the past, but I think this one takes the cake. And personally, I've never been comfortable in the house since. Last February is when my experience took place. One of the coldest nights of the year we've yet had. If I recall, with the wind chill, it was topping off at about minus 42 Celsius. A group of friends had come over to my husband's family's old rustic cabin to have drinks and just catch up. The night was going very well. A wood stove warmed the room, and the all light fixtures placed the room in a cozy light. My husband's family has never been the type to speak vulgarly, and that includes swearing, which his friends are notorious for. Sometime into the night, everything is in full swing, and a few of the guys are playing cards on the small wooden table in the corner of the room. Matt, my husband, walks over to the table and asks his buddy Scott where he got the cards, as he knew cards were not allowed in any of his homes due to some weird stories he was told as a kid regarding spooky things happening, and I guess you could call it superstition. Scott replied that he had found them in the drawer of the china cabinet, and they looked pretty old. That comment didn't really sit right with Matt, and he asked that they maybe play a different game. The guys scoffed and began their playful cursing and poking fun at Matt for being a wuss. No sooner had the bantering started, but we all heard a loud banging on the front door of the cabin. Thinking it was a couple we were waiting on, we opened the door cheerfully, only to be greeted by a tall, somber man who was pale as the snow at his feet, and gaunt, scary looking. He wore a long type of overcoat, and looking past him was travelling by horse-drawn sleigh, which where we are from is slightly unusual for a normal mode of transportation. Not unheard of, but you get the point. At this point, Scott is very drunk and yells to the man in the door, "What the bloody heck do you want, skeleton?" To uproarious laughter from the others. The tall man looks around the door and stares at Scott with dark, hollow eyes and says, "I've come for Scott." Last name. This is not one of us stated Scott's last name around this man, or at all that night. The room turns silent, and Scott stumbles up to the gentleman, who now seems to be getting angry at having his time wasted. Scott gets up in his face and tells him that he had better leave, as there was no way he was going with him. The man tips his hat and leaves, sending the horses on their way through the frigid evening. The weird thing was, looking out the window, the man left no footprints, and the sleigh seemed light as air. Small talk occurs about the previous moment's events, and people decide that maybe it's time to shut it down for the night, as some of the women were beginning to feel uncomfortable with the visitation of the man, and the fact that the cabin door doesn't lock. The DDs gather up those who are leaving, and we say our goodbyes. Scott stays with us for the night, and we all wind down, and eventually Matt and I get some sleep. Cue next morning. Wake up to the front door fully ajar, and Scott not to be found. No footprints indicating where he went, and his shoes were still at the door. Cops are called, and eventually Scott is found. Unfortunately, not in good shape. In the hospital, he was diagnosed with severe hypothermia, and the last thing he remembered was a man next to the couch he was sleeping on, beckoning him to walk a little further into the woods. A tall, somber looking man. The cold. Out in rural Saskatchewan, it gets very cold. As a 16-year-old boy, I was charged with keeping the fireplace alive during those long winter months, chopping wood and tossing it onto the fire all day long. God forbid my father got home from work to find a pile of smoldering embers. It was on one such winter day that my friend and neighbor Anthony came to visit. I say neighbor, but in reality, he had to have lived something like half a mile up the road. Our house is separated by a densely wooded area. He arrived in a beat up Ford truck that he had likely borrowed while his dad was either out or taking a nap. I could count on seeing Anthony at least once a day. He was the only kid my age who actually hung out with me. On days like these, we usually sat in the living room near the fireplace watching TV. Today, well, Anthony had other plans. What do you say we head out into the woods tonight? Anthony suggested, his eyes alit with the prospect. Bloody no, dude. It's already cold as balls right now. I'll be even colder tonight. Let's just chill inside, I said, as I stared into the foreboding thicket of trees. Twilight fast approaching, the brush seemed to stretch out infinitely. Kissing the horizon, I pushed down a slight feeling of dread. Oh, come on, Benny boy. You know you want to know, Anthony said convincingly as he produced a hip flask. Its silver plating dulled and tarnished by decades of use, another item borrowed from his father, no doubt. He swung it around, making sure I could hear the liquid contents swishing inside. It'll be fun, man. Fine, I sighed. Let's leave it an hour. Now, grab an axe and help me chop this wood. When we set out, it was already dark. I had resolved to return home before long. Anthony, however, had brought a backpack full of supplies that suggested we would be staying a while. Much to my dismay, he had brought a radio and cassette tape player with extra D batteries, some flint to start a fire. He'd even packed some hot links to cool over the fire. This was all too much for an excursion I thought would only last around 2 hours tops. Soon the thick canopy encapsulated us, and we had to turn on our flashlights. We stopped after about 15 minutes of walking and found a couple of logs placed to form a circle around a heap of ash. This is the place, Anthony announced, his excitement now palpable. All right, throw some tunes on, I said as I began gathering twigs for the fire. Anthony popped in a Kansas cassette and Carry On Wayward Son began to play. We sat around the low flame as we waited for the uppermost planks to catch fire. Anthony fished his corn-wetted flask out of his backpack and screwed off the cap. He took a generous gulp and smirked as he swallowed the liquid. Bloody yeah, he roared as he moved the flask to within my reach. I grabbed it and took a modest swing. The whiskey burned my throat on the way down. After passing the flask around a few more times, I began to feel the buzz kick in. Anthony and I talked about trucks, music, football, girls at school, regular high school kid shit. We had spent the entire contents of the flask in no time, and the general atmosphere of the hangout seemed to grow less relaxed. It was getting really cold now. I breathed out to my hands and rubbed them together, inching them as close to the fire as possibly could without searing my skin, mentally berating myself for neglecting to bring any gloves. Anthony was seemingly unbothered by the cold. He was up and about, relaying some half-true story. I was even surprised to see that he had taken off his parka and thrown it over one of the logs. I heard the leaves rustling around our heads, the nighttime wind howling, and the firewood crackling in the fire. All of these sounds coalesced in a great symphony. The woods now awake, while the world went to bed. I shuddered. I'm gonna look for more firewood. The flame is getting a little low, Anthony said. Don't worry about it, man, I said, rising from the log I was sitting on. We're out of here anyway. Plus, it's really bloody cold right now. Ben, Don't be such a buzzkill. We can stay a little longer. Sober before you stumble home and get your drunk ass caught by your folks? Anthony reasoned. No way, I said. That's it for me. You wanna stay out here? Go ahead, but I'm gonna head back. I turned to leave, hoping Anthony would cease his efforts and follow me. You're always bloody like this, man. This is why people don't want to hang out with you. I don't even know why I feel sorry for you and come by every day. Anthony spat, the words piercing my eardrums. In hindsight, I should have just choked up his comments to the whiskey, but I took it personally. What made his comments hurt even more was that I believed all those things about myself as well. Piss you, I retorted like a wounded animal and walked away. By the time I arrived home, the booze had well and truly worn off, and my head was aching something awful. I sat by the fireplace, stabbing at the wood with an iron poker, watching as the embers shot up each time. After feeling sufficiently warmed, I headed for bed. I went out like a light. I was awoken by a tapping on my window. I got out of bed and pulled the curtains apart. It was all but pitch black outside, save for a glimmer of moonlight. It was then that I saw him. It was Anthony, throwing pebbles against my window. It didn't make any sense. He should have long been home in bed. What was he doing out here? I could hardly see him, but he seemed different somehow. Just something about him. He seemed off. I opened the window. What the heck, Anthony? I shouted at him, wondering what he was doing here at this hour. Then I noticed it. His skin was a pale blue. His face was gaunt and his hair had several bald spots as if it had fallen out in chunks. He still wasn't wearing his parka. His tattered sweater rippled in the wind, briefly revealing his abdomen. He was emaciated. His skin stretched tightly over his rib cage. The worst part was his eyes. They were stone-like, resembling those of a porcelain doll, hard and cold. I was at loss of words. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was then that the figure that resembled my friend began to speak. The fire died out. You left me there, Ben. A hoarse voice struggled to say. You left me there. No, I didn't, I started to plead. You left me there, Ben. Anthony, get out of the call and come inside, I said, hardly meaning it. I didn't want him in the house, but I was also scared. Desperate to appease him, the figure launched itself into the air, much higher than any human being could or should have been able to. It was now looking directly at me, making eye contact. It was levitating, suspended in thin air. How could this have been possible? It moved closer, towards my windowsill. Seeing it up close only accentuated its haunting features. Disgusting pus-filled boils covered its arms and face. Its teeth were speckled with green and brown bits of refuse. I instinctively slammed the window shut, backing away as the figure made its way closer to the window. I should have screamed, but my voice had escaped me. I tripped on something behind me and stumbled backwards. I saw it now, its face right up against the window. The face that had once belonged to Anthony. You left me there, Ben. It started beating on the window with two decaying fists. I saw cracks began to form in the corner of the window. I was frantic, clambering onto my bed and under the covers, as if that would provide any protection against the being. I wrapped the comforter over my head. Finally, a scream was able to escape my lips. Ben, wake up! My father jerked me awake with urgency. Anthony's dad called. He didn't come home last night. I squinted as the morning light invaded my pupils. Anthony? I said in a weak voice. I left him. I left him there. Left him where? Dad demanded. My mind recalled the haunting figure of the night, struggling to disentangle nightmare from reality. Where did you leave Ben? Before I could even think of what to say, I had already answered the question. I left him I left him in the cold. Well, thank you all for listening. I hope these two scary stories frightened you and terrified you and sent shivers down your spine. I'll see you again very soon. So until then, love the darkness as it always follows.